conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Essex police have arrested 16 people after protests outside a hotel housing asylum seekers in Epping. Officers are stepping up their response as a dispersal order comes into place outside the Bell Hotel following a week of demonstrations. London's Mayor Sir Sadiq Khan has told LBC he's worried about people coming from outside the capital to cause trouble.
One of the joys of a democracy is people are allowed to protest. Even people that I disagree with should be allowed to protest. It's got to be lawful, peaceful and safe. What's not acceptable is violence, thuggery and intimidation.
A father has been found guilty of murdering his 2-week-old son at a premature baby unit in Somerset. Brendan Stadden suffered injuries to his head, neck, legs and jaw at Yeovil District Hospital last March. Irish rappers Kneecap say there is no legal basis for Hungary banning them from entering the country for their appearance at a music festival. The group have been outspoken about their support for Palestine, claimed to be the victims of a smear campaign. And wrestling star Hulk Hogan has died at the age of 71 after suffering a cardiac arrest. He won at least 6 WWE championships and was inducted into its Hall of Fame in 2005. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 76 points at 91.38. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.14. LBC weather, light rain in the northwest tonight, turning dry in the southeast, a low of 7 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening, and welcome to one of the great head versus heart dilemmas of this summer. Tomorrow, Donald Trump arrives in Scotland for a 4-day private trip when he'll visit his golf clubs at Turnberry in Ayrshire and Meany near Aberdeen. He'll meet Keir Starmer on Monday, as well as Scotland's First Minister John Swinney and the Scottish Secretary Ian Murray. They will all be very polite to him, because in the age of tariffs and presidential decrees, they understand which side their oatcakes are buttered on. Murray says that after the recent trade deal with Trump and given global events at the moment, it is really, really important for these historic ties to work with our global allies. And if you're thinking about jobs, he's quite right. Make nice. Trouble is, in Scotland, as in England, a lot of people just can't stick the American president. There's an organisation called the Stop Trump Coalition planning demonstrations at golf courses, central Aberdeen and in Edinburgh. They are determined that he won't get a flattering reception. As I said, heart and head. And this is, for Britain, not just for Scotland, a genuine poser. Now, yesterday you heard from Mehdi Hassan, one of the most eloquent anti-Trump voices in broadcasting. Today, I'm bringing you someone who knows Trump very well and who celebrated his return to the White House, Piers Morgan. Piers, very good to have you on the show. I guess my first question is what do you think Trump's reaction would be if it gets really quite messy when he arrives in Scotland?
Well, hi, Andrew. Thank you very much for having me on your show. I think his reaction would be one of unrestrained glee. If there's one thing that Trump loves, it's a bit of lively opposition and people throwing their toys out of the pram and massively overreacting, as so many people do, to Donald Trump, because it fuels him and it plays into his hands and he can play the victim and he can say, look, you see, I do all these wonderful things and this is how I get treated. So I think that martyrdom plays for Donald Trump rather well. So my advice to people up in Scotland, I've just been up there actually playing golf, is why not go the other way? Why not surprise him and actually just be as you were with me? And I'm not the least divisive person in Britain, but I was greeted with great, I wouldn't go as far as celebration, Andrew. I think you would find that hard to believe, but certainly I was greeted with great Scottish hospitality, a lot of warmth and some good fun. You might find that you unsettle Trump by being nice to him.
Well, that's fair enough. I guess what you're saying in the end, Piers, is that the one thing that he can't stand is being ignored. And if he's the centre of attention, even if it's hostile attention, that's not so bad. It won't put him off. One thing that really strikes me about him, however, he's going to his 2 golf courses there. And golf is really, really important to him. It's where he does a lot of business. He famously got on very well with the new boss of NATO over golf. And there are rumours that he wants to lure Keir Starmer and Keir Starmer's wife to the golf course. Now, so far as I know, Keir Starmer has never picked up a golf club in his life.
I think he plays golf, though.
The golf course is really important to him for diplomacy. It's where he relaxes and can be.
Yeah, look, I think Donald Trump loves his golf. It's well known. It's important to remember he's got very strong Scottish roots. His mother was Scottish, and she lived in Scotland until she was 18 before she went to New York and met his father. So he's always, whenever I've spoken to him about Scotland, his eyes just start shining. He absolutely loves the Scottish roots parts of his family. And whether you like Trump or not, and you sort of almost have to say this before everything you ever say about him that might be remotely positive, the truth is he runs exceptionally good golf courses. You talk to anybody up in Scotland, as I just did, about Turnberry, one of his courses there, and we haven't seen the new one yet, but Turnberry is one of the world's great golf courses, and I think that the Trumps run very good golf courses. Plus, he does use it, as you said, as a kind of business vehicle where he will spend 4 hours with world leaders, with associates, with business pals, and they'll talk about stuff.
Yeah. And well, there's a lot of stuff to talk about right at the moment. Gaza, obviously, but also the future for tariffs and the rest of it. I'm interested, because you know Trump pretty well, how you think Keir Starmer has played him so far. Do you agree with the kind of general consensus that Starmer has played him well?
I do, actually, and I would say in direct contrast to how he's played a lot of the stuff on the domestic agenda, where I think there's been way too many pledges and U-turns from Labour, and I think the country feels like it's in a state of doldrums. Whereas I think that on the foreign stage, I think he's been very good, Starmer, particularly in Ukraine, and also with his relationship with Trump. And I think, funny enough, Trump rang me the day after Keir Starmer went to the Oval Office. And it was pretty ironic, the timing, because that day in the UK, every front page was glowing about the special relationship. It was all lauded. Trump was getting the best press I think I've ever seen him get in the UK. But of course, it was the very next day that the bust-up with Zycinski happened in the Oval Office, and suddenly he got extremely hostile coverage again. But I think he said in that conversation to me that he thought that Keir Starmer was, he didn't agree with him politically about other things, but he found him personally. He's a liberal. Got on with him. But he got on with him very well personally, and I think that Starmer played him exactly the way you have to play Trump. You may not want to, but the way to play Trump, if you want to get things out of him which suit your country, is to show him respect for the office of the presidency, show him respect in public in front of the media. You can be tough behind the scenes with him. Everybody can do that. But I think it's how you play the optics when the world is watching is important to Trump. And I think that Starmer played that very well, as indeed has Peter Mandelson, the ambassador over there.
Piers, you mentioned earlier on his Scottish roots. His mother, Mary MacLeod Trump, born near Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis. And he talks about this. He has talked about it quite a bit. He hasn't been there for a while. He hasn't been to Lewis for, I think, since 2008. But nonetheless, Scotland matters to him. Do you think there is anything in this for Scotland, in this visit?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think if he does meet Scottish leaders, this is their chance to make sure that it's not a wasted trip. Obviously, it's supposed to be a private trip. Trump doesn't really do private anything. He's always on the phone. He's always working the golf courses. Even when he's at leisure, he tends to be working. My advice to Scottish politicians is seize the moment. If you've got something that you think Trump can help you with, this is your chance. And, he will. I mean, look, I think that what Starmer did in getting the trade deal for the UK was very smart. And I think that you're seeing, at the time the tariff war was launched, I said to everyone, you do realise it's not going to continue at these ridiculous rates. This is Trump, the deal maker, in full transaction mode here. What he wants to get at the end of all this are more favourable terms for the United States of America with his deals with foreign countries. And the ones that stepped up quickly, I think, ultimately will get the best reward from Trump. Again, you may not like it. People might not like hearing this, but Trump is very transactional. And if you want to get the best for your country, you got to play by the Trump rules.
Well, picking up on that very point, Piers, I'll be talking to one of the people organising protests in Scotland against him. As we both know, there's an awful lot of people in this country who just can't stick him, can't stick his politics, can't stick the way he, his demeanour, but also very, very worried about the mass deportations and the way he's played Ukraine and the rest of it. What would be your candid advice to people in Scotland thinking of going out to protest against him?
I would just calm your jets, right? Let's look at Trump in the first 6 months of his second term. Let's compare him, if you like, to Barack Obama. I don't remember any protests when Obama came to town, right? Because Obama, and my liberal friends don't like to be reminded of this, but Barack Obama deported more people in 8 years than any president in history, pro rata per year. Over 3 million people got deported in Obama's tenure. So Trump is nowhere near the levels that Obama did. No, I'm not defending all the deportation stuff going on now. I think that some of it is absolutely defensible. If you look at what he's done on the southern border, he's reduced the numbers coming over there dramatically. If you look at the polling, Americans like the fact if you're in the country illegally and you commit a crime, they support those people being deported. The difficulty comes on the deportation about whether you think that people who are there illegally per se should be deported. I don't think that is fair and reasonable, but we'll see how it plays out. But I think generally, don't lose your mind over Trump. Try and be a little bit more rational, a little bit calmer, and argue the toss with him.
Being calmer is never bad advice. Piers, before we lose you, however, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this current Epstein problem that he's got at the moment and the extent to which he is using Obama to deflect people's attention from that.
Yeah, well, I don't know the full merit of these claims against Obama, other than it's indisputable that the Russia collusion stuff that was hurled at Trump for 2 years, and again, it comes into the hysteria that flies around Trump, all of that turned out to be complete nonsense. So for 2 years, the world was told that he colluded with Vladimir Putin to fix the 2016 election. It turned out to be nonsense. So on the Epstein thing, what is indisputable, Trump was a good friend of Jeffrey Epstein, who was a convicted paedophile from 2009. There's no evidence they continued being friends after the conviction. But there's certainly a lot of evidence that they hung out together at parties for a long period before then. So I think Trump has massively misplayed this. I think that they spent a long time in opposition, the Republicans, leading everyone to think that the Epstein files were the most devastating cover-up in history, that the Biden administration was covering up accountability for rich, powerful men, and they just weren't doing what they should do. Trump promised he would be transparent. He's got into power, and actually they haven't been remotely transparent. And you've got to ask questions, difficult questions, that we were led up the hill. I had some of these people from the administration on my show, Uncensored, where they said the files are coming, they're going to be devastating, there's going to be accountability. And then if you remember, Elon Musk fell out with Trump, and he posted late night on his social media platform X, bombshell, the biggest bombshell is that Trump's in the Epstein files. And then oddly, and it might be completely disconnected, but within 3 weeks, the Epstein files had been shut down by the Trump administration. So you haven't got to be a conspiracy theorist to think what is going on here. So I think they need to do what they promised. Be transparent. Just be transparent and let everyone see everything.
Yeah, it's undoubtedly pretty murky. Because one final thing, I know that you interviewed yourself, I think, Hulk Hogan, who became a very big, promoter of Trump and was tearing his T-shirt off and all the rest of it to introduce Trump in one of those big rallies. Well, he's died tonight, so I thought about him before we finish.
Yeah, you know what? He was my kids, my boys all loved WWE. I used to take them to it in America when I was over there doing America's Got Talent. And Hulk Hogan was the most iconic wrestler, I would say, in history. He was a fantastic personality, larger than life. He bore little relation when you met him. I interviewed him once at CNN. He bore little relation to this completely out there character you saw in The Ring or in movies like Rocky. He was actually, in person, he was quite a gentle man. He was charming. He was intelligent. I think he's like an all-American beefcake kind of guy, but very likable to me. And it's a very sad day for anyone like me. I think a lot of parents would have taken their kids to the wrestling, and Hulk Hogan was this huge, iconic figure. Like I say, the greatest wrestler of them all. So it's sad news. Sad news. All right, Piers Morgan, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for that.
Now, listening to all of that, Alla Ivanova, a campaigner with the Stop Trump coalition, joins me now. Alina, you've heard the case, as it were, for making nice to Donald Trump. You know, he's got this huge power. He's got this huge power over tariffs. Don't spoil it for him. What would you say to that?
I would say that Donald Trump undoubtedly has great power, but I think he's also exposed himself as a deeply unreliable ally to those who try and make him their ally and a friend. And I think ultimately this is not going to be a winning strategy for either the UK elected leaders or indeed Scottish elected leaders that are determined to meet with him and kind of give him the honour of a handshake and a polite meeting and all the rest of it. Now, there is also obviously the big question of whether it is right to do so, because of what Trump symbolizes on the global stage as well as the domestic stage. A lot of what you mentioned earlier with Piers about the deportations at home, but also we're all discussing this on the eve of these images coming from Gaza of the starved children. To what extent can we talk about realpolitik when this is, developing in front of our eyes?
I guess we can only hope that John Swinney and Keir Starmer raise this thing with Trump and they get some kind of reaction from him. From your experience sort of across Scotland, how intense is the desire to go out there and make a noise and protest against Trump? Is he a very, very unpopular figure as he is down in London?
Listen, I've been seeing all sorts of funny memes, protests, placards, stickers all over Glasgow ever since the visit was first announced. We've seen polling earlier released this year that 7 out of 10 Scots dislike Trump, or some of them even hate Trump. So it would be no surprise to him that he is not liked in Scotland at all.
He may have noticed already. Alana, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. So there was the case for making nice with Trump and the case for not making nice with Trump. But what do the locals think? LBC's Scotland correspondent, Alan Zycinski, has been out and about getting the latest reactions to Trump's visit.
This seaside spot that I find myself in, about 2 miles away from Trump Turnberry, is now as close as I can actually get to the resort. That entire area is on lockdown in what is one of the biggest security operations ever seen in Scotland. As many as 6,000 officers are going to be lining the streets in the coming days, drafted in by Gold Commander ACC Emma Bond from forces all over the UK. I
mean, it's a large event. It will come at significant cost. We've got a policing plan that fully assesses the threat, and I'm confident that we've mitigated the issues and that the President will be safe while he's in Scotland.
But how are locals feeling about that policing plan, which, as well as causing massive disruption to them, is also costing the taxpayer millions of pounds?
More important things than worrying about him and what he's going to do here. But I know a lot of people who are really not happy.
And it's caused a hell of a carry-on for people who stay in the area. We stay along here, so now we can't park our car across the road from it. And why doesn't he just stay there and leave us all alone?
And on the sandy shores of Aberdeenshire, 2 of Trump's long-term sparring partners are also not thrilled about his return. David Milne had to fight to keep his home as the President built his golf course there, and the former councillor Martin Ford battled to stop the entire development.
He was prone to a series of lies and exaggerations and general BS, for lack of a better term. And he hasn't changed.
Mr. Trump does come here. I expect he will also be announcing that all the people protesting are wearing MAGA hats, that he has just completed the course having got a hole-in-one at every single hole, and that he's the greatest person in the world.
But the First Minister, John Swinney, who will be meeting the President along with the Prime Minister, says that we should be welcoming him for the benefit of the country.
There are a number of issues that are of importance around about the international questions with which we are all wrestling just now, and then there will be some domestic issues that are of importance to Scotland, particularly around about trade and tariffs.
And could golf be the way to secure better trade? Errol Moorcoach from the Republicans Overseas Group thinks so. He says our politicians should be speaking to the sporting bodies and using this opportunity to announce the Open can return to Trump Turnberry.
It's such a cheap thing to give him for what that might bring, whether that's just opening doors or whether that's more friendly and frictionless trade, whatever it might be, it's not going to hurt you. And I think for the golf fan, what's the downside? So there's a win-win. Take the free win, bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
And if indeed the fairways are the way to Donald Trump's trading heart, then perhaps we will see the Prime Minister or the First Minister taking it to the course with him. The rumours have certainly been rife that could be the case. We will find out very soon, though. Air Force One will be touching down in Scotland in just 24 hours' time. Alan Zycinski for LBC.
LBC's Alan Zycinski there. Now, coming up, the new online safety rules for accessing websites with sensitive material come in overnight. But are they enough to protect our children from online harm? I'll be joined by an Ofcom executive next, but the time now 6:20.
This is LBC.
Offers.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:22. New rules under the Online Safety Act come into force overnight. They oblige the big tech companies to protect children from seeing pornography, material that encourages suicide or self-harm or eating disorders, plus violent content, hate speech and much else. I think anybody who is thoughtful and decent will applaud these rules, but there's still the question as to how rigorously they'll be applied. Will the regulator, Ofcom, actually find the big tech companies? Will real action be taken now? The children's charity, the NSPCC, has expressed some scepticism. So let's turn now to Oliver Griffiths, the Group Director at Ofcom for Online Safety. We began by reflecting on this being a really important moment for online safety.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a moment of truth for that question about whether life can become safer online, especially for children in this country. And we've got a deadline of midnight tonight. And if you have a website or an app that hosts porn or some of the most harmful material for children, you need to have highly effective age assurance gates in place.
So let's just talk about how the internet, how the screen is going to look different from tomorrow. And you mentioned porn. What about the various self-harm websites, the extremist websites, those kind of things? How will they look different, or will they look different at all?
Well, we're seeing quite a lot of changes coming in, and it was very good to see X moving earlier today on this. And if you go onto an account there, you will need to go through age assurance, and sometimes this will be done in the background if the site knows you well and knows you've been there for a very long period of time. They don't need to check whether you're 18 at that point. But the key point that they need to find out is, are you 18 or not? Nothing more than that.
And this is for everybody. So anybody going onto any of these sites will have to prove age verification.
So
not just teenagers.
For midnight tonight, it's for these sites that allow this content on. So it won't be for every single app and website that you go onto. But if it allows this content, then you'll have to go through it. And what's important for us is that at that point they know whether you're a child or you're an adult. So it can't just be new members coming on. Have to make sure that they're going through their existing members as well.
What is the difference between the way we are now handling it and other similar countries?
Well, I mean, it's interesting in that we think that we'll have about 6,000 porn websites that will have age gates in place by midnight tonight, and that's considerably more than any other equivalent country on this. And the industry has pointed to the fact that we've worked hard on age assurance so that there are systems that they can choose from, and we've been very clear about what we consider to be effective. So we genuinely do feel that we're going to be leading the pack on this.
Very interesting. And in terms of the child charities like the NSPCC, they have expressed some scepticism, and we have been talking about this on the show for years now, the Child Safety Bill, as it's been working and evolving and so forth. Now it finally arrives. Are you going to be baring your teeth, by which I mean, are you going to be fining people who fail to comply? What kind of fines? What kind of powers do you have over the foreign-based places? TikTok in China, for instance, and some of those other big websites based in the States.
Yeah, and look, you're right. I mean, this has been a policy debate for a long time, and now actually things are happening. And I think that's a really important step forward. We've been absolutely clear that we are going to be baring our teeth here. And since the first bits of the Act came into effect in March, we've launched over 10 enforcement actions, and we are absolutely not going to be holding back. And you asked that question about, does it matter where people are based? Absolutely not. These are the rules of the road. If you look to operate in the UK, then you need to make sure that you are abiding by what we've got here. And we've got the ability to fine up to 10% of global revenue. So they're really big fines that we could potentially levy.
I think people will only believe this is really happening when people are fined.
Yes, and I'm sure that's absolutely right. And we are not going to be holding back. And we need to make sure that we are pressing forward. We're going to be launching a couple of enforcement campaigns early next week as well. But I know that a lot of people are looking at it as being the big test.
And that was Ofcom's executive, Oliver Griffiths. Now, one of the least surprising political events of the week is the announcement that the former Labour MPs Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana are indeed going to form a new political party. Their website calls it the Your Party, though Sultana quickly said that wouldn't be its name. And the opening declaration talks of a rigged system, mass poverty, taxing the rich, nationalisation, Gaza and genocide, pretty much, I think, what you would expect. The question is, how many people will flock to this new party? I predict it'll end up being called the Peace and Justice Party or something similar. Some pollsters say around 10% of the electorate would give it a go. Joining me is the political journalist Michael Crick. Michael, great to have you on the show. You wrote a famous book about the militant tendency way back in the day, so you know a lot about the hard left. What is your view about the prospects for this party?
Well, on the one hand, it's likely to be pretty chaotic. I mean, Corbyn as Labour leader made Boris Johnson as a party leader look, utterly organised and disciplined. And, the whole of his leadership was complete chaos. I remember a story from 2015 when he was running from the Labour leadership. And he and his aides all got on the train to go up to Birmingham for a debate. And as they were coming into New Street Station, one of them said, "So where is this debate?" "I don't know. I thought you had the address." No. You've got the address, surely. And none of them had the address of where they were meant to be going to. And so they said, "Oh, that's all right. Yvette Cooper's down there. We'll go and ask her." And Corbyn said, no, we can't do that. she'll know that we're incompetent. And it went on like that throughout the Corbyn leadership. They're going to have to really get themselves organised, and there's all sorts of problems I can see there. On the other hand, I mean, you'll remember from 2015 the extraordinary numbers of people that came to Corbyn's rallies when he first.
He hasn't had a certain charisma.
And he won handsomely.
He has this kind of charisma. I mean, there's no doubt about it. People are quite transfixed by him. All the jokes about the magic grandpa and stuff. Yeah. He has something special.
Yeah, he does have something special. And interestingly today, I mean, the trouble with Corbyn when he was Labour leader is he came across as grumpy all the time, particularly when journalists tried to doorstep him, and he lost his temper a lot of the time. Whereas we saw a slightly different Corbyn today when he certainly the interview I saw, smiling and laughing a bit and being a bit modest. And Corbyn actually says that his new party is partly going to be fun. I don't think the Corbyn Labour Party was much fun. So maybe that will help. If he's willing to laugh at himself a bit more in the way that Nigel Farage does, that could make a difference. And then remember, of course, that there are lots of there must be about a dozen MPs now who are potential members of this new party. The ones that have been suspended by Labour. John McDonnell and the recent ones suspended by Labour, and then of course the independents who were elected at the last election on a pro-Gaza platform. So if he plays his cards right, if they both played their cards right, they could actually end up with more members, more MPs quite quickly than Reform have. Corbyn also says there's going to be no control freaks. They're not going to be a load of control freaks. Well, that's a bit rich coming from the man who employed, Seamus Milne as one of his aides and Andrew Murray, who were certainly, in my eyes, and probably yours too, the arch control freaks. So maybe it's a new.
It's very, very hard to guess what it's going to feel like at the moment. But if you're Keir Starmer, you can't be completely relaxed about this. I mean, I think a lot of the people you've mentioned will actually fight quite hard to stay inside the Labour Party. John McDonnell, for instance, said he's been Labour all his life. He's not going to give it up. So it's not obvious they're all going to go over to Corbyn or anything like it. Nonetheless, there is now a door on the left which people can go through if they're pushed too hard.
And it's a lot easier for voters and activists and supporters and Labour members to make that jump than it is for MPs. And if only 5% of the public think, we'll give Corbyn a try, then that could be devastating for Labour's figures and votes at the next election. And of course, the other fact you've got to bear in mind here is there are others on the left, well, notably the Green Party, who will be gnawing away at the sort of really left-wing vote in this country. So it could be quite a contest. But, Corbyn now is significantly older than he was 10 years. He's 76 now. Maybe Zara Sultana will have to make most of the running. They're asking for ideas. They're going to have this conference, they say. I can see that being pretty chaotic. And they're saying it's going to be run by the members and for the members and so on. But I suspect that won't be the way it works out. That Corbyn will have to. I will be sitting at
the back of that hall with my notebook, and I'm sure you will be as well. Michael Crick, great to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for that. Coming up, hundreds of former diplomats have signed a letter pleading for Keir Starmer to recognise Gaza as a Palestinian state. Is this a tipping point? I'll be joined by one of the signatories next. By the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Essex police have arrested 16 people following protests outside a migrant hotel in Epping. A dispersal order has come into force outside the Bell Hotel this afternoon, and designated demonstration areas have been put in place. A father has been found guilty of the murder of his 2-week-old son in a special care baby unit in Somerset. 27-year-old Daniel Gunter inflicted catastrophic injuries to Brendan Stadden in March last year. And Piers Morgan has told LBC Donald Trump will probably show unrestrained glee by protests during his visit to Scotland. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, the broadcaster and longtime friend of Donald Trump says opposing him just plays into his hands. LBC weather, light rain in the northwest tonight, turning dry in the southeast, a low of 7 degrees.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
We're looking ahead to events tomorrow when, of course, that doctor strike will take place. The doctors are saying that they believe that they still have the majority of public support. Do you support them? Lucy's in Muswell Hill.
100% support.
Really?
Yes. I think that they had a significant pay increase last year, which was fully justified.
Nigel's in Temple Fortune.
I think it's an absolute total disgrace, nearly 30% in a number of years. They have a duty to protect people.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio, on Global Player, and the new LBC app. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. The big official moment for the government today was the signing of the new trade deal with India, something that Keir Starmer's very proud of and which, as he pointed out, the Conservatives tried to do and couldn't. But what does it mean for us? Well, we'll be able to sell medical devices, cars, chocolates, biscuits, lambs, salmon and whiskey, for instance, more easily to India, and they'll sell us cheaper clothes, cheaper shoes and cheaper food too. It should create jobs here. It should give us access to public contracts in India. It'll also mean that it's much easier for Indians to live and work inside the UK. Let's talk now to Allie, Renison, trade policy expert and a former advisor to Kemi Badenoch as Business and Trade Secretary. Allie, thanks for joining us. Let me ask, first of all, for you to explain to people, India is a difficult country to do these deals with. They've had a long history of protectionism and protecting their own industry, so it was always going to be difficult to land this.
It is. They have some very high both tariff and non-tariff barriers, and that affects that the cost of selling to or operating in that market is considerably more than perhaps kind of sort of similar like-minded economies. So this is a trade deal that once you actually tackle those tariff and regulatory barriers can actually make a big trading easily with India.
And I listed them earlier on, but there's an awful lot of food and technology and so on that the UK wants to sell to India and may well be able to sell to India. But coming in the other direction, it's partly about people. India has a very, very large young group of tech experts and coders and all the rest of it who they want to be able to work in the UK and in the West. So this is slightly a kind of a goods for people deal, isn't it?
Not exactly. I think that when you look at people, you're really talking about migration policy, and migration policy dealt with through trade agreements. We do have temporary labour mobility, which is called Mode 4 of the services arrangements under global trade arrangements, and that effectively allows companies to move their workers on a very temporary or secondment more easily than they would otherwise.
Well, it's a very, very big moment either way. Allie Renison, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight. News organisations from around the world, including Reuters, the BBC, Associated Press and Agence France Presse, have joined forces to raise the alarm over journalists in Gaza who they say are increasingly unable to feed themselves and their families. Here in Britain, as we observe the images of starvation in Gaza, a whole corps of former ambassadors and diplomats have asked Keir Starmer to recognise a Palestinian state now. It's not just them, of course. The Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, has called what's going on there depraved, barbaric and a grave sin. Let's talk next to Lord Mark Malloch Brown, the former Minister of State for the United Nations under Gordon Brown, UN diplomat himself, and a signatory of that letter to the Prime Minister. And I began by asking him, why now?
Well, I think it's partly the situation on the ground that, the level of just war crimes occurring in terms of the cost of lives and displacement of the population of Palestinians in Gaza has just reached, and we've run out of superlatives in terms of the level of crisis point that it's arrived at. But second, there is a forthcoming summit hosted by France and Saudi Arabia around recognition. And so I think, as we're looking for diplomatic levers to try and translate the outrage that I think we all feel into some way forward, this issue of recognition has really come up as, one such tool.
And the signatories to this letter, lots and lots of senior former diplomats, ambassadors and so forth. Is this, in a sense, the Foreign Office in exile or the diplomatic corps of the UK speaking with one voice to the Prime Minister?
Well, I think it goes wider than that because of the UN names, admittedly mainly British UN names who've signed as well. But look, I'm someone who's very wary of signing these kinds of letters. I think they're often just an empty emoting, which, makes the signatories feel good, but doesn't move the dial in terms of action. But for these things, timing is everything. And I think this is a moment where we're at a tipping point because of the situation in Gaza, because of unease inside the British cabinet, and because of a much wider international unease amongst so many of our allies, that, this is a moment when something has to be done.
I'm interested you say there, Mark, unease inside the British cabinet. You're probably picking up, as I am, that some senior cabinet ministers, including, I think, Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, want to see recognition quite quickly. So Keir Starmer is getting a lot of pressure, really from inside and outside now.
Yeah, I think so. And, and what are such cabinet members reflecting? The fact that in their constituencies, as much as in their own personal consciences, which I'm sure is a big part of it too, there is just outrage and dismay. And, I think one has to step back a little bit and just remind oneself of the dramatic change in the sort of political security context that the last 18 months has produced. You went into that period where Israel's reputation was still high, but there was alarm about the Netanyahu government. Then you had the tragedy of October and the Hamas invasion. And, two things have happened since. One, on the military side, Israel has, amazed everybody by the extent of its military dominance of the region. Small country, it's overwhelmed much bigger neighbors such as Iran. Obviously, it's decimated Hamas inside Gaza, Hezbollah, the rest. And yet, at the same time that its military fortunes have surged, its political fortunes internationally have dramatically deteriorated because, this country, which has enjoyed such a deep support from so many of us over so long because of the nature of its beginnings as a country and the terrible context in which it was born, nevertheless, has sort of under this government moved towards what, a newspaper you and I have both worked for, The Economist, just calls now in a leader a pariah state. And so, this is an extraordinary moment where, Israel's military success is completely at odds with its political deterioration. And I think this is where this issue of recognition of a Palestinian state becomes a more powerful tool than one might imagine in terms of trying to leverage some kind of way forward.
Well, picking up directly on that, Mark, President Macron of France has been calling for Palestine to be recognised as a state now for some time. The British government has not been keen for that to happen, has held out and held out. Do you understand why? Do you understand what the problem has been for Keir Starmer and David Lammy?
Well, I think their position has always been when the time comes, we'll do it, but we need to get to a point of maximum leverage. And, you can interpret that position as a cup half full or half empty. But I think, the reasons for their caution beyond the point of wanting to have maximum impact when they do it, is the consequence, the issues inside the Labour Party itself around the whole sort of drama around Corbyn's leadership and the sort of anti-Semitism label that got attached correctly to much of what happened then. So it's really, in some sense, tied their hands a bit, that history. And, more widely, like any post-Second World War liberal democracy, there is a deep reluctance to go into head-to-head confrontation with Israel because of its history, because of the collective conscience we all have to feel about why a Jewish state had to come into being.
But perhaps now that moment is coming.
The moment is coming. If you're looking for to quote back to them we're looking for that moment of maximum leverage to do it. That moment is now. And I think, if I may, Andrew, the key point in all of this is people say, well, Britain, its voice isn't so significant anymore. What is significant, though, is joining up with Saudi Arabia and making it clear to Israel, to its public opinion as well as its politicians that the only way towards normalization in the region, which would allow Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel, is via a process of negotiation for a Palestinian state. And that's the key lever. You can militarily dominate, but there's no political exit ramp until you deal with the issue of the Palestinians and a state.
We have to fall back to the politics in due course. Lord Malloch Brown, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC.
Thank you, Andrew.
Coming up, it's that time of the week where I'll be joined by my wise political panel as we digest some of the biggest stories of the week. But the time now, 6:45.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
It's not my party, it's your party, or is it? That's the name of the new party being formed by Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana. Which party does it most threaten?
Ian Dale on LBC. This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:47. Busy day, busy week. Let's turn to the political panel now. A kind of brains trust this is for modern times. I'm joined by the political broadcaster, podcaster and writer Steve Richards and by Jerry Scott, assistant political editor of The Times. Welcome to you both. There's so much to talk about. Can we just start off with Gaza? Jerry, I'll start with you. A lot of pressure now building on Keir Starmer to recognise Palestine, and somehow it's kind of hard to put your finger on it. It does feel like we are at a tipping point in this story.
I think it does. And, this, I wouldn't call it a fringe view within the Labour Party, but it's definitely been something that they've not been talking about kind of in the front of their minds until now. But you do now have senior people in the Labour Party calling for that to happen. Among them, actually, Wes Streeting. So you can see that there is this kind of groundswell of support starting, and the pictures that we've seen the last few days as well have only added kind of fuel to that call.
That's absolutely right. Steve, Jerry there was pointing out that actually some cabinet ministers are also now piling on the pressure for the recognition of the Palestinian state. Wes Streeting has been talked about, others have as well. It feels, as I was saying to Jerry, a bit like some kind of moment where he's going to have to move. He's meeting Trump, of course, on Monday, I think, in Scotland. But this is not an issue they can kick down the can for much further.
He will have to move. And a lot of cabinet ministers are in that position. And in a way, it's how can they convey their horror at what's happening in Gaza. And this is one way of doing it. And it seems to me that's why it's happening. The horror now is so intense, so unbearable, so unyielding. You can't just carry on, even though, as a Westminster government, you have hardly any agency over this Netanyahu regime. You can't just carry on. And this is one way of kind of expressing your horror. basically.
I think almost everybody in politics at the moment agrees with that, Steve. It's very interesting. Jay, let's talk about some of the other things that have been going on recently. This has been another week where I think everybody at Westminster has been looking to one side at the bond markets as well, a sense that the numbers no longer really add up. There are horrible decisions to be taken by the Chancellor. Now she's wiped her tears away in the autumn. You know, the pressures on tax, but also the pressures on public spending have been really, really intense. We've got a new party, Jeremy Corbyn, and lots of splinters happening on the left, and a question of whether the Labour Party that was elected last year can really hold together. What do you think?
It's really tricky, isn't it? And, you know, for anyone that thinks this is going to be a relaxing kind of summer break for politicians has got it completely wrong, because you're right, you come back in the autumn and then the budget is straight round the corner. But that's not the only thing either. You know, we saw those rebels over the welfare payments. They've potentially got a taste for it now. You've got battles over the 2-child benefit cap coming up as well, and tricky decisions about where the money is spent. And you're right, it's not like Rachel Reeves has got a load of wiggle room here and kind of, you know, bags of cash that she can kind of you know, put around. And the big temptation maybe for some of those on the left of the party who have been calling for a different track is this Jeremy Corbyn Zara Sultana party that we've seen. We're not quite sure what it's called yet, are we? It's apparently called Your Party, and then they've put that it's not called Your Party, and it's going to be a vote on what it is called. But there is an alternative now, which might look quite attractive to some.
I think they'll call it something like the Peace and Justice Party. That's my prediction, but we'll see. Steve, do you think it's going to have much of an impact?
Yeah, I do. I remember the day when Jeremy Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party, going on Newsnight and saying this was a huge strategic error. Jeremy Corbyn announced his resignation as leader of the Labour Party a day after the 2019 slaughter. He got virtually no media attention, sought no media attention, until the Starmer-McSweeney regime gave him acres of it. And this is one of the consequences. A political party, which, however chaotic, will attract support from Labour, especially at this time of deep unease. I mean, you mentioned the bond markets, and it's such a weird summer coming into the autumn where you have the bond market saying, look, the sums don't add up. You have pressure on public spending to increase it, and yet they've ruled out all these tax rises. It is a really stormy summer that we're living through.
A turbulent summer ahead. Jerry, try and put yourself, if you don't mind, into Starmer's shoes a little bit. He's going to get a small, short holiday, but then he's got a whole series of big decisions and big moments ahead. I guess, first of all, the budget, and then quite quickly he's looking ahead to all those slew of elections in May next year. Just talk about what you think he should be focusing on right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what we know that the Prime Minister's going to want to be focusing on is trying to, you know, build those bridges within his own party. We've seen reports this week that he is wanting to take more of an active role in policy making. There has been a concern that actually when policy has made it to his desk, it's too far down the track and he can't go back easily on it if he wanted to. But that feels like kind of tinkering around the edges for me. What I imagine he's going to spend the summer doing is really looking at that Downing Street operation. We've already seen reports of creating kind of a new communications department of some sort and bringing some kind of old hands in there to run that. So I think there will be a bit of a reset, but it's tricky to know what he can actually do because those public finances are so tight. And I think really looking towards May next year, the big kind of defence that he'll have to pose is against reform, because they are looking to take many council seats as well as, you know, seats in Wales as well. That will be the main opposition that he's facing.
It certainly is. Steve, you have written about so many, in fact, virtually every other Labour Prime Minister at some detail. I'd be very interested in your view about, you know, his strengths and weaknesses as they're evolving in this first year, because Jerry's absolutely right. There's talk about bringing in a new Downing Street operation, now perhaps bringing in Pat McFadden to be a kind of political overlord in Downing Street beyond his current role, bringing in Tim Allen, the former Blair-era spinner, as a sort of head of communications and all of that. But beyond that, what about Starmer himself?
Yeah, I think that gets to the essence of it. I mean, Tim Allen is a very talented guy who's been a hugely successful business person. Keir Starmer has brought in a huge number of people who used to work for Tony Blair. And here we are analysing what's going wrong. And so that clearly isn't a solution in itself. It's about him. and whether he can learn the arts of politics. I mean, you've written a brilliant piece for this week's New Statesman, just highlighting, and I think it's still under-analysed, the degree to which he is almost freakish as a Prime Minister. You list it. He doesn't really talk to cabinet ministers. He doesn't really talk to MPs. I don't think he knows who some of them are. He's not interested. He doesn't read media commentary and so on. The list goes on. And that was another one we've just been discussing, this sort of thing that he wants to learn about policy a bit earlier before it's sort of on the edge of implementing. Prime Ministers lead policy development, shape it, define it, make the arguments about it. And this is about him. He could bring Tim Allen. Tim Allen might say, well, you know, Keir, there's this happening. And so these are big flaws in my view, but they're repairable flaws. People can learn as they go along, especially when you've got a landslide. But they are, I think,
he absolutely has to keep learning.
Yeah.
Let me turn then, Jerry, to the other great big issue of the week, which has been the migrant crisis, the boats coming across. The numbers have gone up. I tried to count them, but I think there's been 6 or 7 Labour initiatives with great hoo-ha and razzmatazz. We know we're going to change this law, we're going to change that law, we've got to deal with the French, we've got to deal with the Germans, and so on and so on. And in terms of the boats, it has absolutely no impact so far. The numbers keep on rising, and the atmosphere, no doubt, being fomented by far-right groups and neo-Nazi groups and all the rest of it, genuine anger, genuine fear around the country. This is the biggest problem for Keir Starmer, isn't it, over the summer?
Yeah, the gangs are not yet smashed, are they? And that's what the promise that we hear over and over again. But how you do that is seeming to be a little more problematic than maybe expected. And, this anger actually over this issue has been inflamed the last few days by Keir Starmer himself when he sat in front of MPs at the liaison committee and he said there's lots of housing available for people who are homeless and asylum seekers. Well, that will be a surprise to councils across the country who have, backlogs for accommodation, the 1.3 million social housing waitlist, and in fact the hotels that are full of asylum seekers as well. It just doesn't kind of ring true with reality. So that, and as you say, if that keeps happening, these boats keep coming across the channel over the summer, that is only going to get worse.
And Steve, in terms of the politics, it's really bad politics, isn't it, to keep saying that you're going to do something decisive about a policy, in this case the small boats coming across the channel, and announce again and again and again without anything actually changing on the ground. Especially when you've got lessons from the past. I mean, Rishi Sunak declared "Stop the boats," and it was a sort of slogan on many of his press conferences. Just kept coming. And they just kept coming. And this is an issue. I disagree that it's his biggest challenge. It's a huge challenge. The biggest challenge is what we were talking about before: the economy, public spending, tax, bond markets. How this all works out is, I think, a mountainous challenge. And you can feel it in the air. I do agree with that.
But the boats are up there because it's so potent and accessible as an issue, and the source of anger that we're going to see again this August, I fear.
Yeah, I think the migrant issue is going to be the short-term challenge.
Yeah.
And you're quite right, though. It's tax and spending. Well, listen, a slightly doleful but very serious and interesting conversation. Steve, Jerry, thank you both very much. President Donald Trump's due to visit Scotland tomorrow to visit his Turnberry golf course as security for the protests is ramped up in preparation. I spoke to the journalist and friend of the President, Piers Morgan, about the visit. I asked him about any tips he had for welcoming the head of the United States.
Why not surprise him and actually just be as you were with me? I'm not the least divisive person in Britain. I was greeted with great Scottish hospitality, a lot of warmth and some good fun. You might find that you unsettled Trump by being nice to him.
It's a thought. It might be worth trying anyway. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at X on LBC, it's Henry Riley. But now it's time for Ian Dale. X should be.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, actually, it's not my party. It's not their party. It's your party. or is it? That was thought to be the new name of Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana's new party, but now they've said it isn't. Has there ever been a more chaotic launch of a political party than this? Well, possibly Change UK, remember them? Polls show that they could get 10 to 15% of the vote, but is their party your party? Which of the old parties will lose support if this new party gains traction? At 8, the Online Safety Act comes into force today, but what will it really change? And at 9, attitude to alcohol change. Should we view alcohol like we think of smoking?
On your radio.